Nobody told Jaewon that the hardest part of moving forward wouldn't be the grief, it would be his daughters. Hana and Yuna were 2.5 years old. They still slept with a blanket that smelled like their mother. They still pressed their small hands against her portrait every morning like it was a ritual, like touch could keep her tethered to them. And tonight, their father was about to say 3 words that would shatter the only world they knew how to protect. Your new mum. What happened next wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't the ordinary noise of toddlers being difficult. It was something rawer than that, a sound that made the woman standing near the staircase go completely still and made a grown man's hands shake as he held his own children and realized he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. But that moment wasn't even the worst of it. The worst came weeks later, from a grandmother who looked at these little girls, at their tight, beautiful curls, at the warm brown skin that carried their mother's heritage, and decided that all of it needed to be corrected, contained, erased. And when the twins finally understood what was happening, they didn't cry. They didn't scream. They ran. 2 toddlers. A stolen photograph. A mile of freezing Seoul wind, because somewhere out there was a bench near the Han River where their mother used to hold them, and that was the only place left in the world that still felt like her. If this kind of story reaches something in you, the complicated, the emotional, the deeply human, then Velvet Noir was built for you. Subscribe. This is your space. That's the night we're going back to. But to understand why it mattered, you need to know who these people really were before everything fell apart in a single evening. The apartment breathed at a different frequency than the rest of Seoul. 42 floors above the Han River, the city moved like it always did, relentless, luminous, indifferent. But inside Jaewon's penthouse, time had learned to slow down. Not out of peace, out of grief. The kind that settles into a home's architecture, into the grain of the furniture, into the particular silence between one song ending and another beginning. Tonight, it was Stevie Wonder. Isn't She Lovely slowed to a lullaby pace, drifting from a small speaker in the corner of the living room. Jaewon had started the habit the week after Odessa died, a way of keeping her voice in the room even when her voice was gone. The twins had grown up with it. To Hana and Yuna, Stevie Wonder wasn't music. He was something closer to a heartbeat. Jaewon stood near the window, his white linen shirt slightly damp at the collar. He had changed 3 times tonight. He told himself it was the Seoul humidity in late spring. It wasn't. Behind him, the girls moved through the living room with the chaotic grace of toddlers who owned every inch of space they occupied. Hana, 2.5, wore a blue dress and commanded the room the way her mother used to, loudly, with her whole body. Her curls were pulled into 2 puffs at the top of her head, dark and full and magnificent. Her skin caught the warm, amber light of the apartment and held it. Yuna was quieter, her curls looser, her eyes perpetually watchful, as though she had already decided the world required monitoring. They were the most beautiful thing Jaewon had ever made. And tonight, he was terrified of them. Soo-yeon stood near the staircase with her hands clasped in front of her, a gesture that looked like patience but was actually concentration. She was dressed simply. No jewelry except a thin gold chain at her throat. She had asked Jaewon what she should wear, and he had said, "Just be yourself." And she had understood that to mean, "Don't try so hard." She was the daughter of a textile mogul. She knew every room she walked into. This one made her feel like a student. She watched the girls. The girls had not looked at her yet. Jaewon crouched down to their level, his hands finding both of their faces with the ease of a man who had done this 10,000 times. He steadied himself. He had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed it in the shower, in the car, in the elevator on the way up. None of the rehearsals had prepared him for Hana's eyes wide open and trusting, the way they always were when he was about to tell her something important. "Hana, Yuna," his voice was steady, almost. "You know how we talk about how Mommy Odessa is a star in the sky? How she watches us from up there?" Hana nodded, serious as a judge. "Well, Soo-yeon is here because she wants to help us. She wants to be part of our family." He paused. He felt the word gathering in his chest like a stone. "She's going to be your new mum." The apartment went silent. Even Stevie Wonder seemed to pause. Hana's face didn't change immediately. There was a half second, a fragile, suspended moment where everything still could have gone another way. Then her expression cracked open from the inside, and the sound that came out of her was not a toddler's cry. It was something older, something that had no business living in a body that small. Yuna followed, and the room broke. Jaewon pulled them both to his chest, his eyes finding Soo-yeon over their shaking shoulders. She had gone very still. Her hands, no longer clasped, hung at her sides. She was not angry. She was not wounded in the way he had feared. She looked like a woman who had just understood, completely, what she had walked into. "I'll give you some space," she said softly, and turned toward the stairs. Jae-won didn't stop her. He couldn't. He had 2 daughters screaming for a woman 3 years in the ground, and all he could do was hold them and wonder if he had just made the worst decision of his life. The gifts started appearing on a Tuesday. Not grand gestures. Nothing that announced itself. Soo-yeon understood instinctively that grandeur would be the wrong currency with these girls, so she arrived each time with something small, something considered a handmade cloth doll with tight yarn curls and brown button eyes, a miniature hanbok in deep gold, a book of Korean fairy tales with illustrations so detailed you could spend 20 minutes on a single page. She never handed the gifts directly to the girls. She left them on the kitchen counter and let Jae-won pass them along. It didn't matter. Every gift ended up at the base of Odessa's portrait. The portrait hung in the living room floor to ceiling, commissioned the year the twins were born. Odessa wore a yellow dress. Her hair was natural, voluminous, framing a face that carried both laughter and something deeper. The artist had captured her the way she looked on Sunday mornings, before the world made any demands on her. Odessa in that painting looked like a woman who had already won. Now her portrait had a growing collection at its feet. The doll, the hanbok, still folded, the fairy tale book, unopened. Each item placed with a deliberateness that was unsettling in children so young. It wasn't chaos, it was ceremony. Jae-won found Soo-yeon in the kitchen one evening, standing at the counter long after the girls were asleep. She didn't hear him come in. She was still in the clothes she'd worn to dinner, a dark dress, her hair loosened from whatever it had been earlier, falling past her shoulders now. She was reading something on her phone, or pretending to. The tea beside her had gone cold an hour ago. He should have announced himself. He didn't. He watched her for a moment, the line of her back, the small, unconscious way she exhaled when she thought no one was watching, the way the kitchen light caught the curve of her jaw and felt the pull of it low in his chest, familiar and unwelcome, and entirely unavoidable. She turned, found him standing there. Neither of them spoke for a second too long. She carried every gift over herself, Jae-won finally said. "Hana," both hands, very carefully. She treated them like they were fragile. Soo-yeon looked at him. "She's not rejecting me," she said quietly. "She's protecting her mother. There's a difference." A pause. "I'd think less of her if she didn't." He crossed the kitchen. He told himself it was to refill the kettle. He stopped closer than the kettle required, close enough to catch the faint trace of her perfume beneath the kitchen smell of the evening, something warm, something that had been living in his memory for weeks without his permission. "You keep coming back," he said. It came out lower than he intended. She looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted, not softness, something more careful than that, more aware, the look of a woman who knows exactly what is happening and has not yet decided what to do about it. "You keep asking me to," she said. The space between them was a live thing. He reached past her and turned the kettle on. His arm grazed her shoulder barely, technically accidental. Neither of them moved away from it. From the living room, the music box began to play all on its own. They both turned toward the sound. Hana was sitting cross-legged in front of the portrait, listening, holding the cloth doll in her lap, the one with the tight yarn curls. Soo-yeon exhaled slowly. Jae-won stepped back, creating space that felt colder than the room warranted. "She took the doll back," Soo-yeon said softly. "She did," Jae-won said. They stood side by side in the kitchen doorway, watching his daughter sit with her mother's portrait and a gift she hadn't returned, and neither of them said another word about what had almost happened between them. Soo-yeon went home an hour later. Jae-won stood alone in the living room for a long time after the door closed. The lullaby had stopped. The apartment was the particular quiet of a place where children sleep fragile, watchful, full of held breath. He walked to the portrait. He stood in front of it the way he had 10,000 times, close enough to see the brushwork, the slight imperfection in the rendering of her left hand, the detail the artist had gotten almost right but not quite. He had never told the artist to fix it. Some part of him had always felt that the imperfection was truer than perfection would have been. He thought about the kitchen, about the warmth of Soo-yeon standing closer than necessary, about the way her perfume had stayed in the room after she moved away from it. Then the guilt arrived, not loudly, not dramatically. It never did. It came the way it always came, quietly, through the side door. wearing the face of every ordinary thing. The smell of her perfume against the memory of Odessa's. The warmth of Soo-yeon's presence against the cold that had lived in this apartment for 3 years. He looked at Odessa in the yellow dress. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said to the painting. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know if this is moving forward or just moving." The painting gave him nothing back. It never did. That was both the cruelty and the mercy of the dead. They couldn't tell you whether you had their permission. You had to decide that for yourself, and live inside that decision, and find out later whether it was the right one. He turned off the light and went to check on his daughters. Mrs. Park arrived the way she always did, unannounced, with the quiet authority of a woman who had never needed permission to enter any room. She was elegant in the way that certain Korean women of her generation were elegant, precise, controlled, every element of her appearance a deliberate statement. She wore her silver hair swept back and her disapproval forward. She kissed Jae-won on the cheek and walked past Soo-yeon with a nod that technically counted as an acknowledgement but felt like a dismissal. The visits increased after the introduction. 3 times a week became 4. 4 became 5. She arrived with food the housekeeper didn't need to cook and opinions no one had asked for. With the twins, she was different. She smiled at them genuinely, even warmly, but there was an agenda beneath the warmth, subtle enough that Jae-won almost missed it. Almost. "Hana, let me fix your hair," she said one afternoon, producing a fine-tooth comb from her bag as though she had planned it. Hana went still, her curls dense, beautiful. A direct inheritance from Odessa were something the child already understood as hers. She touched them, sometimes the way she touched her mother's portrait. Knowingly, "Her hair is fine," Jae-won said. "It's tangled," Mrs. Park replied, already reaching. Soo-yeon set down the cup she was holding. "Actually, I helped her with it this morning. It's not tangled." Her voice was measured, polite, unyielding. Mrs. Park looked at Soo-yeon the way she might look at a piece of furniture that had spoken. Then she withdrew the comb and smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes. Later, Jae-won found his mother in the kitchen. The girls were supposed to be asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the city below. "She's a good choice," his mother said, rinsing a teacup with the focused efficiency of a woman who had decided the conversation. "Soo-yeon, well-bred, appropriate. She'll be good for them." "She already is," Jae-won said carefully. "She'll help correct things." Mrs. Park set the teacup down. "The girls are at an age where habits form. What they look like, how they carry themselves, what they identify with. It can still be shaped." She didn't look at him when she said it. She looked at the window. "They are Park children. The sooner they understand that fully, the better." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "What does that mean?" Jae-won asked, though he already knew. He wanted her to say it plainly, wanted to hear exactly how far she was willing to go. "It means they don't need to grow up clinging to something that is gone." She finally turned. Her expression wasn't cruel, that was the most unsettling part. She believed what she was saying. Odessa is gone. The less they look and act like reminders of that, the easier it will be for everyone. Jae-won opened his mouth. He never got to close it, because he saw her. Hana stood in the doorway, bare feet on the cold tile, her curls loose around her face, her tattered mommy blanket trailing from one hand. Her eyes moved between her father and her grandmother with a precision that had no business existing in a 2-year-old. She didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. She understood tone. She understood the way Soo-yeon's name sounded in her grandmother's mouth, not like a person, but like a plan. Jae-won crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and lifted her. She pressed her face into his neck and said nothing, just held on. Over her shoulder, he looked at his mother. For the first time in his life, what he felt toward her was not complicated. Soo-yeon left 30 minutes later. She made her excuses quietly, gathered her things, and rode the elevator down 42 floors alone. In the lobby, she stood for a moment near the door without pushing through it. She had heard enough of the kitchen conversation to understand its architecture. Not every word, but enough. Enough to know that Mrs. Park was not an obstacle she could charm or outlast. Enough to know that what she had walked into was not a grieving family finding its feet. It was a war over identity, over inheritance, over what these 2 little girls were allowed to be. And Soo-yeon had just become a weapon in it, not by choice, not with her consent, but by proximity, by existing in that apartment, by being the woman Jae-won had chosen. She pushed through the lobby door. The Seoul night was cool. She stood on the pavement with her coat unbuttoned and her bag over one shoulder and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, about leaving. Not dramatically, just simply, a phone call to J1 tomorrow. Kind, honest, irrevocable. She had walked into grief before, and she knew its weight, knew that grief shared was not grief halved, that sometimes love asked more than a person had to give. She could leave. It would be clean. It would be reasonable. No one would blame her. She stood there for 60 seconds. Then she thought about Hana in the doorway, bare feet on cold tile, the mommy blanket trailing from one hand, the way the child had pressed her face into her father's neck without a word, the way she had simply held on as though holding on was the only language she had left, and she was fluent in it. Soo-yeon buttoned her coat. She walked to her car, started the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Then she drove home, and she did not make the phone call. The Lunar New Year arrived with the force of something that had been planned for months and resented for weeks. Caterers moved through the penthouse in choreographed lines. Flowers, white chrysanthemums. Mrs. Park's choice replaced the twins' drawings on the entryway table. The cozy, controlled disorder of a home where toddlers lived was smoothed over, tucked away, erased. By mid-afternoon, the apartment looked like a showroom. Beautiful, impersonal, nothing like itself. Jaewon moved through it all with the tightly managed expression of a man performing composure. He was standing near the bar reviewing the evening's seating arrangement when he heard a sharp, small sound from down the hall. Not crying. Something tighter than crying. He found the twins' room already occupied. Mrs. Park stood in the center with a fine-tooth comb and 2 crimson silk dresses laid across the bed. Hana and Yuna were already half-dressed, their arms rigid at their sides with the particular stillness of children who have learned that resistance costs more than compliance. Their curls dense and beautiful, and entirely their mothers were being pulled back with a severity that flattened them against their skulls. Yuna kept reaching up with one finger to tug at the collar. Hana had gone somewhere else behind her eyes. Jaewon opened his mouth. Soo-yeon was already there. He hadn't heard her come down the hall. She stood in the doorway beside him now, and he felt the moment she registered what she was looking at, not in her expression, which stayed composed, but in the quality of her stillness, the kind that precedes something deliberate. "Their hair shouldn't be pulled that tightly," she said. Her voice was level, polite, carrying no warmth for his mother whatsoever. "It causes breakage, and it hurts them." Mrs. Park didn't turn around. "It's traditional. It's appropriate. It's painful," Soo-yeon said. Same tone. Same register. A wall meeting a wall. Mrs. Park set the comb down, turned, and looked at Soo-yeon with the patient condescension of a woman who had been managing rooms full of difficult people for 40 years. "After photographs," she said. "You may do as you like with them." She walked out. The temperature in the room dropped with her absence rather than rising. Soo-yeon crouched down in front of Hana. No hesitation, no ceremony, her expensive dress pooled on the floor without her registering it. She looked at the tight pull of the pins, at the way Hana's jaw was set in a near-perfect imitation of her father's composure. She reached up slowly, making no sudden movement, and loosened the 2 tightest pins. Just enough. Her eyes held Hana's the entire time, asking before her hands moved. Hana let her. Jaewon watched from the doorway. 12 seconds. It lasted 12 seconds, and it rearranged something in him permanently. When Soo-yeon stood, she turned and found him watching. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The distance between them was 4 feet, and nothing at all. She was flushed slightly from crouching, a loose strand of hair across her cheek, and she was looking at him with an expression that wasn't asking for anything, which somehow made it worse. He crossed the room. He reached up and moved the strand of hair from her face, slow, deliberate, the backs of his fingers grazing her cheekbone in a way that could not be called accidental. She went very still. Her eyes stayed on his. "Thank you," he said. His voice came out rough at the edges. She held his gaze for 1 beat longer than was safe. Then she turned back toward the girls, her expression recomposed, professional, giving him nothing more, but her hand, hanging at her side, was shaking slightly. The first guests arrived at 7. By 8, the girls had disappeared. Yuna saw it first. She had been standing near the mantelpiece for no particular reason, or so it appeared. Toddlers move through rooms the way water moves through cracks, purposelessly, until suddenly they are somewhere that matters. Yuna had drifted to the edge of the party, the way she always drifted when the world became too loud, and she had looked up at the mantelpiece the way she always looked up at it, expecting the familiar. It wasn't there. The silver-framed photograph of Jaewon and Soo-yeon, sat where Odessa's portrait used to live, not beside it. Instead of it. The portrait itself had been moved or removed sometime between the caterers arriving and the first champagne flute being lifted. Yuna stared at the empty space for a long time. Then she turned and found Hana across the room, and between them passed something that required no language, no gesture. Just the particular frequency that exists only between two people who began as one. Hana's eyes moved to the mantelpiece. Back to Yuna. Something settled in her small face, not grief this time. Resolve. She slipped away from the edge of the crowd and moved down the hallway toward the back room where the family's personal things had been relocated to make space for the gala's aesthetic. It took her 4 minutes. Jae-won was deep in conversation with a business associate on the far side of the room, his back turned. Mrs. Park was holding court near the entrance with two women who laughed too brightly at everything she said. No one watched the hallway. Hana emerged with a smaller framed photograph tucked under her arm, a candid shot from the girl's first birthday. Odessa in a yellow head wrap, her warm brown skin luminous under natural light, laughing at something off camera, one hand resting on Jae-won's chest. Both twins asleep against her, one on each side, their tight curls pressed against her collarbone like they had always known that was the safest place. Hana held it against her body the way children hold things they know are precious and know are at risk. She found Yuna by the front door. A caterer had propped it open to carry in a final delivery. The night air moved through the gap, cold, sharp, carrying the particular scent of the Han River in winter. Neither girl hesitated. They understood the city the way children understand the geography of love, not through maps, but through feeling. Somewhere beyond the traffic and the towers was a park. Cherry blossoms in spring, bare branches now. A bench near the river where their mother used to bring them before they were old enough to remember anything except the warmth. They remembered the warmth. The door clicked shut behind them. 42 floors above, the gala continued. Crystal clinked. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. Mrs. Park accepted a compliment on the flowers with a modest tilt of her head. It was Jae-won who noticed first, turning mid-sentence with the sudden, sourceless dread of a parent whose body knows before their mind catches up. He scanned the room once, twice. His pulse shifted. Hana. He said it quietly, still hoping. Yuna. The business associate kept talking. Jae-won was no longer listening. He moved through the room with the controlled urgency of a man who had not yet allowed himself to panic, checking the hallway, the twins' bedroom, the back room, empty. The small framed photo was gone from its relocated shelf. He stood in the back room for 3 seconds with his hand on the doorframe. Then the smart lock notification came through on his phone. Front door, manual exit, 8:47 p.m. The temperature outside was 4 degrees. He didn't run. Running would have confirmed it. He walked fast, controlled, the kind of walk that is running in everything except form back through the hallway and into the living room. Soo-yeon was talking to one of his business partner's wives. She looked up the moment he crossed the threshold, the way she always looked up when he entered a room, and she read his face in under a second. She excused herself before he reached her. "They're gone," he said. She didn't ask him to repeat it. "How long?" The lock logged 8:47. "It's 9:12. 25 minutes. 4 degrees. 2 toddlers in silk dresses somewhere in the city." She was already thinking he could see it, the way her eyes moved slightly without focusing on anything, running through something internal. He had learned the difference between Soo-yeon thinking and Soo-yeon stalling. This was thinking. "The park," she said. "The one with the cherry blossoms on the Han. You told me Odessa used to take them there when they were babies. She'd carry them in the sling and sit on the bench facing the water." She met his eyes. "That's where they've gone." He stared at her. He had told her that story once, months ago, on the balcony after the girls were asleep. One evening, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, he hadn't known she was keeping it. "It's a mile from here," he said. "I know. They're 2 years old, Soo-yeon." "I know." She was already moving. "Which is why we need to go right now." She had her coat on before he finished processing. He followed, leaving the gala behind the champagne and the chrysanthemums and his mother's controlled expression, all of it receding like a version of his life he was already done with. The cold hit them the moment the lobby doors opened. Soo-yeon didn't slow. He fell into step beside her on the pavement, and they moved together through the Seoul night at the particular pace of two people who have collapsed, the formality between them without discussing it, shoulders almost touching, breath visible in the cold air, her heels striking the concrete in a rhythm that he matched without thinking. At the first intersection, she stumbled on a cracked tile. His hand caught her elbow before she'd registered the stumble herself. Firm, immediate, his fingers wrapping around her arm with a sureness that surprised them both. She steadied. He didn't let go right away. They kept walking. After a block, she said, without looking at him, "She's going to be all right. You don't know that." "I know, Hana." A pause. She walked a mile to find somewhere safe. "That means she still believes safe exists. That's not nothing." He looked at her profile in the dark, the set of her jaw, the faint moisture at her temple from the cold, the way she moved like a woman who had decided something irrevocable and was simply executing it. He thought, not for the first time, that he was in serious trouble. They broke into a run for the last 200 meters. They had made it further than should have been possible. A mile of Seoul at night is not a gentle thing, crosswalks and concrete, the exhaust of late traffic, the indifferent surge of strangers moving at adult speed through a world built for adult scale. And yet somehow, Hana and Yuna had navigated it, whether by instinct or by the particular stubbornness of children who have decided something matters. They had moved through all of it and arrived at the river. They were on a bench near the water, huddled together the way they slept, Yuna tucked under Hana's arm, Hana's chin resting on top of her sister's head. The crimson silk dresses were dark with cold now, clinging to small bodies that had stopped shivering only because they had run out of energy to shiver. Hana still held the photograph. Both hands. Even now, her knuckles were pale against the frame. The cherry trees above them were bare. In spring, they would be extravagant, explosive with pink. Tonight, they were just dark architecture against a darker sky. A group of teenagers had gathered nearby, 5, maybe 6 of them, drawn by the spectacle of 2 small children alone at a riverbank at night. They weren't threatening exactly. They were young and loud and thoughtless in the way that youth sometimes is, crowding close, speaking over the girls, one of them crouching down to peer at Hana's face with the invasive curiosity of someone who had never learned about space. Hana pulled Yuna closer and said nothing. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She had run out of tears 2 blocks ago. Soo-yeon came through the tree line at a near run, her heels abandoned somewhere on the path behind her, her stockinged feet silent on the cold pavement. She didn't shout. She didn't announce herself. She simply walked into the middle of the group with the quiet, absolute authority of a woman who had made a decision and arrived at its consequences without apology. "Move," she said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't heated. It was the kind of instruction that carries its own gravity, and the teenagers felt it the way a room feels a shift in pressure before weather arrives. They dispersed, slowly, with the mumbled protest of people who wanted to save face but had already lost the moment. Soo-yeon stood between them and the girls until the last one was gone. Then she turned. Hana was watching her. Yuna had pressed her face into her sister's shoulder, too cold and too exhausted to look at anything. Hana's dark eyes tracked Soo-yeon with the same careful, assessing intelligence they always did, measuring intent the way children measure it, through the body rather than the words. Soo-yeon took off her coat. It was cashmere, pale gray, the kind of garment that had a history and a value, and none of that mattered at all. She draped it over both girls at once, tucking it around their feet, pulling it up to Yuna's chin. Then she lowered herself to the freezing pavement, not onto the bench beside them, but down, at their eye level, her knees on the cold ground, her face even with Hana's face. She was shaking slightly. From the cold or from something else, it was hard to say. "I'm not here to take her place," Soo-yeon said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she let it. She didn't repair it. "I'm here to be the person who helps you remember her." Hana looked at her for a long time. Jae-won arrived at the tree line 30 seconds later. He saw them, his daughters, wrapped in Soo-yeon's coat, Soo-yeon on the freezing ground at their level, and he stopped. He couldn't move. He wasn't sure he was supposed to. He stood at the tree line and let it happen. Soo-yeon was still on the frozen ground, her knees against the cold pavement, her face level with Hana's face. "I never met your mother," she said. "But I know she was someone worth fighting for. I see her in you every day, in the way you hold your chin up, in the way you watch everything." Her voice cracked once, and she let it. "I would never ask you to let her go. I don't want you to." Hana looked at the photograph in her hands, then back at Soo-yeon. "Grandmother wants to take the pictures away." "I know." Soo-yeon didn't flinch. "And if she tries again, she'll have to go through me." Something in Hana's face loosened. Not a smile. Something more structural than a smile, a decision. Yuna stirred under the coat, turned her face outward, and held out one small hand. Soo-yeon took it without hesitation. Jae-won heard footsteps behind him. His mother arrived at the tree line with the deliberate pace of a woman who had composed herself on the walk over and intended that composure to function as armor. She stood beside him and looked at the scene. Soo-yeon on the pavement, the girls wrapped in her coat, the quiet that had replaced the crying, and for one unguarded moment, something moved across her face that wasn't calculation, something that looked almost like grief, almost. Then her expression reset. "We should get them inside. People will have noticed." Jae-won turned to face her fully. "You moved Odessa's portrait." A pause. The space. "You moved it and replaced it with a photograph of me and Soo-yeon on Lunar New Year, in a house full of people." He kept his voice quiet. "It was the most dangerous version of it. And my daughters walked a mile through 4 degrees of cold to find the only place that still felt like their mother." Mrs. Park held his gaze. He watched her prepare a response, watched her reach for the register she had used his entire life, the one that reframed her choices as love, as pragmatism, as the sacrifice of a mother who simply knew better. She didn't use it. Instead, a silence, long enough to mean something. "I didn't think they would," she began. "I know you didn't," Jae-won said. "That's the problem." She looked past him at the bench. At Soo-yeon, who was now sitting beside the girls properly, Yoona in her lap, Hana pressed against her side. At the photograph of Odessa, still in Hana's hands, still intact, carried a mile through the dark to be kept safe. Something in Mrs. Park's face shifted, not a transformation, nothing so clean, more like a fault line, a place where the certainty had cracked and let in something she hadn't planned for. She was a woman who loved her son. She was also a woman who had spent 60 years deciding which loves were worth protecting and which were inconvenient. Tonight, for perhaps the first time, she was seeing the cost of that arithmetic in the face of a 2-year-old sitting in the freezing dark. "She looks like her," Mrs. Park said quietly, almost to herself. "Hana. She looks exactly like her." Jae-won said nothing. "You are not welcome in my home as things currently stand," he said. "When you're ready to reckon with what that means, I'll answer the phone." He paused. "I mean this without anger, Mother, but I mean it completely." She didn't respond. She stood for a moment longer, looking at the bench. Then she turned and walked back toward the lights of the building, not with the sharp precision she'd arrived with, but slower, carrying something she hadn't brought with her. Jae-won walked to the bench and crouched down. Hana leaned into him immediately. Yoona reached for his collar. Soo-yeon rose from the ground stiffly, her knees protesting, her feet long past numb, and he looked up at her from below. He reached for her hand. She looked at it for one beat, just one, then took it, and held it the way you hold something you've stopped pretending you don't want. 6 months is not a long time, and it is everything. The penthouse breathed differently now. Not lighter exactly, grief doesn't lift on a schedule, doesn't vacate a space simply because life has decided to continue. But it had learned to share the room. The lullabies still played. Stevie Wonder still drifted through the apartment on weekend mornings, soft and unhurried. But there was laughter underneath it now. The particular laughter of small children who have decided, at some cellular level, that the world is safe enough to be loud in. The mantelpiece held Odessa's portrait again. Larger than before, in a new frame, dark wood, substantial, the kind that says permanent. Soo-yeon had chosen it. She had driven to 3 different shops without telling Jae-won, had stood in each one holding the photograph against different frames, asking the shopkeepers' opinions with the seriousness of someone making a decision that would outlast them. She had been right about all of it. The new painting arrived on a Thursday. It took 2 men and a careful hour to hang it on the main wall of the living room. Jae-won stood back when it was done and looked at it for a long time without speaking. The artist had rendered Odessa first center, radiant in yellow, her warm brown skin luminous against the background, her natural hair full and unrestrained, one hand resting on Jae-won's chest, the way it had in the original photograph. A younger Jae-won beside her, less guarded, his eyes carrying none of the weight they held now, and there, rendered with the same care, the same deliberate brushwork, the same warmth of light, Soo-yeon, standing beside them, holding the hands of Hana and Yoona, who stood between the 2 women like the living bridge they were. A family of 5, 1 in spirit, 4 in flesh. Hana stood in front of it for a long time the morning it went up. She still had the tattered mommy blanket. It lived on her bed now, folded, not carried. She studied the painting the way she studied everything, thoroughly and without performance. Then she turned to Soo-yeon, who was standing near the window pretending to look at something on her phone. "You're next to Mommy," Hana said. "I am," Soo-yeon said. That's okay, Hana said, and walked away. 3 words. No ceremony. Just a 2.5-year-old moving on to the next thing, the way children do when they've made a decision and see no reason to elaborate on it. Soo-yeon looked at the wall for a moment after she left. Then she pressed 2 fingers briefly to her mouth and looked at the ceiling, and that was all she allowed herself. Mrs. Park came once, 3 months after the night at the river. Unannounced as always, but quieter than she had ever been. She stood in the living room and looked at the new painting for a long time without speaking. Odessa in yellow. Soo-yeon beside her. The girls between them, held. Hana walked up to her grandmother and looked up at her. "That's Mommy Odessa," she said. Soo-yeon put her in the big frame. Mrs. Park looked down at her granddaughter, at the curls she had once wanted to correct, at the warm brown skin that carried another woman's entire legacy, and crouched down slowly, the way old certainties lower themselves when they finally give way. "She's beautiful," Mrs. Park said. Her voice was different, smaller. "I know," Hana said, and walked away. Mrs. Park stayed for an hour. She didn't touch the girl's hair. When she left, she paused at the door and looked at Soo-yeon. "Thank you," she said, "for the frame." It was not an apology. It was the beginning of one. Soo-yeon accepted it for exactly what it was. That evening, as the sun dissolved behind the Han River and the city began its nightly transformation into light, Hana walked up to Soo-yeon on the sofa and tugged on her sleeve. "Soo-yeon." "Yes, honey. Can we tell Mommy Odessa about my drawing today?" Soo-yeon set down whatever she was holding and pulled Hana into her lap in a single fluid motion, the way she had learned to without asking, without hesitation, the way you hold a child who has finally decided you're allowed. Across the room, Yuna climbed onto Jaewon's shoulders and gripped his hair with both hands, and he winced and laughed and held her ankles. "She's already watching," Soo-yeon said, her chin resting on top of Hana's curls. "But let's tell her anyway." "Start from the beginning," Hana began. The lullaby played. The city glittered below. And in a penthouse above the Han River, a family told a dead woman about a drawing, and she was there in every word of it, not as a ghost, not as a wound, but as the root that had made all of it possible. The victory was never in forgetting. It was in the fierce, expanding love that chose to remember and kept growing anyway.